Hi, everybody, and welcome to this talk. My name is Matteo Pazzona. I'm an academic at the Department of Economic and Finance here at Brunel. So first, let me thank a lot Janet and Arafat and all the team of the Brunel Research Festival for organizing this talk and all the other talks in these weeks. It looks like it has been like a success with a very good audience. So the reason of organizing a meeting today, well, the main reason is to present the findings of a new report, new evidence, as the slides there suggest, a new evidence of post-Brexit UK migration trends, written 6 months with Federico Filauri. We just completed a PhD in political theology at the University of London School of Advanced Studies. Matilde, a colleague at here at Brunel Global Challenges, but also a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics. So Federico and Matilde and all the other speakers that I introduced will provide an overview of recent dynamics in immigration over 3 dimensions, namely student, work, and other types of immigration, such as irregular migration. Yeah, this is a report, the second follow-up of a report we've written last year with Federico and also previous colleague Emre. Yes, we have to acknowledge the financial support by the Research Centre of Law, Economics and Finance, and thanks to Nigar, who is the director of the center. Commenting on the reports, we have Ben Brindle, who is a researcher at the Immigration Observatory, Oxford University, and Ermione Xantopoulo, who is also a colleague of ours in the law school, and she's also director of research for Brunel Law School. I mean, the roadmap for today's talk is really having the first hour presenting and commenting the findings of the report, and there will be ample space at the end in the last 30 minutes for Q&A from the public. So please, the idea is this event to be kind of there's going to be engagement from the public and hopefully a lively conversation at the end. So it's a pleasure to give the floor to Federico, who's got the slides already shared, and he will present the report and the first 2 dimensions that we cover in this report.
Many thanks, Matteo, and good morning to everyone. Many thanks to the Brunel University. It's a pleasure to take part in the research festival, and I hope you'll be happy to hear about these insights we're going to share today. So very briefly, the way we are going to structure the presentation is the following. I will start by offering an overview of the most recent policy changes, and then delve into the figures of current migration trends, starting off with figures of net migration, and then looking at citizenship grants, visa grants, and then offering a more specific focus on students and on workers. Lastly, I will comment on the most recent policy changes that have been introduced couple of months ago or last month. So let me just start with an overview of what do we mean with the post-Brexit migration trend. We refer to the 2021 point-based immigration system. So let's start by looking at the main features of this post-Brexit immigration system. The system was initially presented in December 2018, and it was enacted on 1st January 2021 at the end of the transition period for Brexit. Formally, it is a points-based immigration system so whereby migrants are granted a leave to work, to study, or to remain in the UK based on a score determined on by a series of parameters. In one way, we can say that the new system is similar to what was in place for non-European migrants before Brexit, with the main difference that now it does not differentiate between European and non-European migrants, and it places both under a visa regime, with the exception, however, of Irish citizens. So similarly to the previous one, it includes work visas, most notably the skilled work visa, study visa, and family visas. And besides this, it opened some humanitarian routes, which have been primarily used for people from Ukraine, from Hong Kong, and Afghanistan. While putting an end to the EU free movement and thus forcing Europeans to obtain a visa to study, to work, or to reside in the UK, the system was, to a certain extent, more relaxed than the previous one when we consider non-Europeans. Among other things, the system foresaw the introduction of the graduate visa, which it's a special visa that allows students that have recently graduated to live and work at any job, at any rate in the UK for the 2 years after the graduation, 3 years in case of the PhD. And also, when compared with the previous non-EU migration system, it slightly lowered the salary threshold for work visas. And also, but this was in place just before 2021, there was the possibility of bringing a dependent for anyone with a work or a study visa. These are the main changes. I will comment later on at the end of my presentation about the changes that have been implemented in April this year. So, as I said, let's start with the full picture of the migration trends to the UK. We've chosen to use the figure of net migration. The net migration is the difference between the immigration and the emigration of people into and out to the UK. So it's supposed to offer an overall picture of the fluxes that we are seeing. So the chart here shows the net migration trends covering the period from 2012 to 2023. Latest data has been published just yesterday by the Office for National Statistics. For the production of these figures, there is a complex methodology that the Office for National Statistics uses, drawing data from a variety of sources. One is the International Passenger Survey from the Office for National Statistics. Then there is the Home Office borders and immigration data from the Home Office, and also the so-called RAPID, that is a registration and population interactions database. It's a series of data that register the interaction with public services that people have here on the UK territory. And this comes from the Department for Work and Pensions. So as I said, the Office for National Statistics combines those data and produces an estimate that changes at each issue. So the latest issue is the one that is represented here in this chart. Now, looking at the at the chart, we see that migration patterns were relatively stable before the 2020 pandemic. After the 2016 referendum, after the Brexit referendum, immigration of European nationals registered a steady decline. One can see the purple line reaching a top between 15 and 16, and then with a steady decline. While there was a slight increase in non-European migration between 2018 and 2020. After that, the pandemic caused a sudden drop of immigration to the UK, and as a consequence of net migration, mostly because of travel restrictions and, of course, difficulties related to the pandemic. Shortly after, however, figures of non-European study and work-related immigration registered a considerable increase. It is the last 3 years after the implementation of the new system. However, after reaching a peak in December 2022, one can see it especially with the gray line up there. The net migration registered a slight decline in 2023. So in 2022, we have a minus 10%, a 10% decrease compared to the peak. The latest figures that we have are estimates of 685,000 for net migration. And this is still a 47% increase compared to December 2021. In December 2023, immigration to the UK was just above 1.2 million, and it was largely driven by non-Europeans. Immigration was 532,000. It is interesting to note that since 2014, emigration, so fluxes outside of the UK, was led by EU nationals up until September 2023, whereas in December, so the latest data we have, in December 2023, non-European emigration was slightly higher, 233,000, than European emigration, 202,000. Now, considering the last year from December 22 to December 23, non-European immigration registered a slight decrease, a 2% decrease. And this was arguably partly caused by the conspicuous decline of the Ukrainian humanitarian route, minus 90%, and of non-European students intake, minus 10%, as I will show down below in the next slides. The decrease has been partly offset by a rise of non-European worker migrants, like plus 53%. But on the other hand, when we look at European migration, we have a negative net migration. One shows one can see the purple line below zero. And in December, we have minus 75,000 in December. And this keeps signaling that less Europeans are inclined to come to the UK to study or work than those who are leaving the country, despite a slight increase of immigration compared to December 2022. And this is the picture of net migration. Now, let's now look at the main reasons for immigration. As I said, we will be talking mainly about work-related and study-related immigration. The latest data from the Home Office, the one from yesterday, they showed that 42% of migrants come for work, 34% to study, 11% for humanitarian and asylum, and 7% for family and 6% for other. The chart that you see here shows the total of visa grants from March 2019 to December 2023 by type and geographical area. We can notice that there is a sharp decline in 2020, independence of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is immediately noticeable. But then in 2021 and in 2022, all types of visa registered an increase, quite a remarkable increase. This is more likely, it can be related to three reasons. On the one hand, the end of the pandemic, then the need for also EU nationals to obtain a visa to work or study in the UK, and of course this sums up to non-European visas, and then the conspicuous number of visas issued under humanitarian routes. One can easily notice that the faded strips, the faded area, represent the non-European visa grants, whereas the full color, the tiny ones, represent the European. So one can easily get a sense of the proportion of European visas vis-a-vis non-European visas in this chart. When we look at the grant total, we see that the total rose from 1,427,000 in 2022 to 1,440,000 in 2023. This marks only a 1% rise over the past year. The significant decrease of humanitarian route visas has been compensated with an increase in work visas. Data shows a 46% rise in work visa grants from 421,000 in 2022 to 616,000 in 2023. Just for comparison, 10 years ago, in 2014, the skilled worker visa, or the equivalent of the skilled worker visa, were 90,000, and in 2023 they reached 500,000. So over 5 times more when we look at work visas. Now, for completion, we also looked at the issuing of the British citizenship, or application and granting of citizenship. Of course, this data reflects movements that have happened at least 6, but most likely 10 years ago. And so it comes after a significant period, the qualifying period. But it is still interesting to notice how this trend has still arguably been affected by or been somehow influenced by policy changes. So this chart here shows the grants of British citizenship to EU and non-European nationals over the past decade, registered quarterly. We noticed that the slight increase of European nationals obtaining a UK citizenship after the Brexit referendum in June 2016 then leads to a plateau until it registered a rapid growth towards the end of 2021, when the new points-based system was adopted. In 2023, so the latest data available, grants of British citizenship rose by 15% compared to 2022, totaling 202,041, of which 47,000 to Europeans, plus 4%, and 155,000 to non-Europeans, an increase of 19%. Among European nationals, the most represented nationalities were Italy with 10,000 citizenship grants, Romania with 6,000, and Poland with also 6,000. All of which accounted for 48% of British citizenship grants to EU nationals. When we look at non-European nationals, the top nationalities were India with 18,000, Pakistan with 16,000, and Nigeria with 8,000 nationals, accounting in total for 28% of the total non-European nationals. It is now time to focus a bit more on the two main groups that we are going to look at, students and workers. So the Home Office reported 34% of UK immigration in 2023 as study-related, making it the second reason to migrate. We must, just a parenthesis, we must recall that the arrival of students has a significant positive impact on the UK's economy. For reference, estimates for the Department of Education indicate that export earnings linked to UK higher education reached 21 billion in 2021, which is more than double the amount of 2010.
Federico, sorry to interrupt. We are seeing the cities. Okay, no.
Can you see the right slide? The students.
Yeah, no students. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. And tuition fees. Tuition fees, which for most overseas students are roughly double the amount paid at the home rate, amounted to more than double than the total higher education income in the academic 2021-2022. So 57% of tuition fees came from UK domiciled students, 5% from EU domiciled students, and 38% from non-UK and non-European students, which means that, in short, the amount of tuition fees paid by internationals covers almost half of the total tuition fees coming to universities. Hence, the economic impact of international students is quite significant. I've talked about grants before, visa grants before. When we focus on study visa grants, there has been a decrease, a 3% decrease, from 624,000 in 2022 to 606 in 2023. However, in the past 5 years, the share of study visa granted to dependents experienced a significant rise. While in 2019, study visas issued to dependents accounted for 4% of the total study visa grants, the share rose to 13% in 2021, 22% in 2022, and 24% in 2023, which means that last year, almost 1 in 4 visa study grant was granted to a dependent. Now let's look at the chart in this slide. This chart presents data from the Office for Students, collecting the results of surveys conducted in the last 6 years. We know that the number of international students, those who are not domiciled in the UK at the moment of registration, grew by 61% if we consider the 6 years. So from 211,000 in 2017 to 340,000 in 2023. However, it is noticeable that the last year marked a 3% decrease in new entrants, from 351,000 in 2022 to 340,000 in 2023. This 3% decrease is consistent with the data we have from visa grants. So while internationals enroll into an undergrad course rose slightly, postgraduate enrollments fell by 6%. However, we also must take into consideration the fact that this decrease in international new enrollments was paralleled by a 3% contraction in UK domiciled new entrants, from 723 to 704,000. One can see also the trend of the dotted line above. This suggests a general contraction in new enrollments in UK universities. More specifically, it should be noted that the share of EU students enrolled into a new course in the UK has rapidly shrunk. From a quarter of total overseas students, new enrollments in 2017-2018, this decreased to 20% in 2020-2021, to a mere 8% in 2021-2022, according to HESA. This fall of students' enrollment from European nationals can be related to, on the one hand, the doubling of the tuition fees, or roughly the doubling of the tuition fees compared to pre-Brexit rates, because they were Europeans were used to pay fees at the home rate. And another possible factor explaining this fall is the need to apply for a student visa for the period of their studies and for the graduate route afterwards, whereas in pre-Brexit regime, there was no visa requirement. One last note on students is that when we look at how many students do remain in the UK at the end of their studies, we find that among non-Europeans issued an initial study visa in 2016, only 17% still had permission to stay in the next 5 years at the end of 2021. So around 5% had work visas, 9% were still on study visas, and 0.1% at settlement. This changed, of course, after the introduction of the graduate visa, when the number of international students who remained in the UK with a valid visa increased, as I will talk a bit later. You should now see the figures of students pertaining to Brunel University. So we have now 3 charts on the left that show the intake, so the amount of new students of Brunel University in the academic years from 2019-2020 to 2023-24. According
Federico,
to, yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if it's just me, but I can still see the slide with the students number, not the Brunel one.
Yeah, okay. I will need to.
No, now we're on the. Okay, now it's fine.
Okay, yeah, okay. There's a bit of a delay. I'm sorry about this. So if now you can, or I assume you can now see the 3 charts for Brunel University.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes. So if we look at the block on the left, we see that there is data from home students, European students, and overseas. let's look at the European students. We see that the European students intake reached its peak in academic year 2021-22, but never surpassed 1,000 students per course group. Whereas, let's look at the overseas or non-European students. The third chart, this chart shows a constant and steady rise in postgraduate registrations from non-European students since post-Brexit regulations, reaching a spike in academic year 2022-2023. One sees the postgrad is the one in yellow, and however, in the last year there was a sharp decrease, a considerable contraction in non-European master students there in at Brunel. And the block on the right is the Brunel University January intake. It shows it is the latest data available from the university of people registering this year. And it is also interesting to note that there is in the last 2 years a considerable decline from over 1,000 to 500 new students. It must be noted that this is, though this covers all students like European, overseas, and home, the vast majority of January intakes are internationals. So it is also a chart indicative of the trend in international students. Okay, with this,
yeah, Federico, I think we're going a bit over. So I think that the best thing would be now to give the floor to Ben and comment about the work trends.
Okay,
So,
it is fine. It is fine. Maybe I will just briefly cover the last in my last bit the new policy changes, and then hand it over to Ben.
yeah, perfect.
Okay, so we're gonna skip the trends in work migration. Just to briefly present the policy changes that have taken place this year. I hope you can see the summary of the 2024 policy changes. These
Federico,
so the latest policy changes as summed up here and in the slide. So since the 11th of March 2024, social care workers are no longer allowed to bring dependents on their visa. Since the 4th of April 2024, the minimum salary to be sponsored for a skilled worker visa has increased, with the baseline minimum rising from £26,200 to £38,700. This does not affect the health and care worker visa, which includes social care for education workers on national pay scales. Since the 4th of April 2024, the shortage occupation list has also changed to reduce the number of jobs where it will be possible to sponsor someone for a skilled worker visa on less than the usual minimum salary. Then the minimum income normally required to sponsor someone for a spouse or a partner visa is rising in stages from £18,600 per year to £29,000 and ultimately around £38,700. This measure started on the 11th of April this year, with the first increase to 29,000 and the second increase to £34,500 will take place later on at a yet unspecified time in 2024. Finally, the Migration Advisory Committee has conducted a review of the graduate visa, and they recommended that the route remains in place in its current form. But at the time of speaking, it is not clear how the government intends to proceed in this regard. One last mention is that in December 2023, the government announced new measures to curb irregular migration, and later on, Dr. Matilde Rosina is going to present on this. And with this, I'll conclude my presentation and hand it over to Matteo.
Yeah, thanks, Federico, for the presentation. So I want to link the question to Ben, to this slide, actually. And I would like to ask you, Ben, thanks for joining us. If you could kind of tell us a bit what you think about the impact of this increase in the income, the minimum salary threshold income on the various sector of the UK economy. So the impact of this increase in threshold on the labor market, and maybe tell us what are the sectors that are going to be mostly affected. And also, it would be interesting to know whether, like, what part of the UK are going to be mostly affected.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Firstly, thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. So yeah, perhaps I'll focus on three of the changes. If it's possible to bring the slide up, that would be fantastic. But but before that, maybe just to sort of summarise some of the sort of overarching changes that we've seen in the labour market since the post-Brexit immigration system's introduced. What we've broadly seen is that the numbers of EU citizens working in the UK has fallen. That's clear from the net migration data that Federico presented. And this fall has happened particularly in sectors which have higher shares of lower skilled roles. So sectors like hospitality and manufacturing, for example. But this has also been offset by higher employment of non-EU citizens, including in these sectors. Now, the big question, which we don't really know from the data, is whether this is happening inside or outside of work migration routes, because most non-work groups, such as students, family migrants, Ukrainians and Hong Kongers, they can work in the labour market. And so is it just that these industries are hiring more skilled migrants through the work migration system, or is it that these groups are potentially taking the lower skilled jobs that the EU citizens are vacating when they leave the UK? So that's sort of just the broad context. Moving to sort of the changes that we've seen recently in policy, with the salary threshold increasing from £26,000 to £38,700, we actually, despite it being a sharp increase, don't expect there to be too much of an impact in terms of the range of jobs it affects. And that's because, as Federico said, that many jobs aren't impacted by it. So if we look at the visa grants in the year ending September 2023, and I think it's about the same now, 50% of visa grants under the skilled worker route were to care workers who are exempt from this. And then a further 20%, as Federico said, have their salaries set according to nationally set pay scales. So they're also exempt. So that means that we have about 30% of occupations by visa grants, which are subject to these changes. But many of those jobs already pay higher than £38,700. So in terms of this increase in the general salary threshold, we expect it to fall predominantly on middle skilled jobs. So jobs such as butchers and chefs, that they're sort of those type of roles that are the ones which will be really affected by this. Perhaps the more interesting change when it comes to salaries is to something called the going rates. And this is an occupation-specific threshold, a secondary occupation-specific threshold, which, if it's higher than £38,700, is the binding threshold. And this has been increased from the 25th percentile of earnings, so relatively low in the earnings distribution, to the median earnings. And when we compare the median earnings in these higher paying roles to the actual salaries which were attached to visa grants, it looks generally to fall in between the 25th percentile and the median percentile in terms of what migrants actually received. In other words, those who earn towards sort of the lower end of the distribution wouldn't have been able to have received a visa on that salary with these new going rates. So that means that taking sort of all of these changes in the round, what we expect to see some uneven impact. So middle skill jobs, as I said, and also those earning sort of towards the lower end of the salaries which are offered into other sectors. So that's probably going to fall more on employers outside of London and the southeast. It's probably going to fall on younger workers. That there are some age-related discounts on salary, but you know, even so, younger people tend to earn towards the lower end of the earnings distribution, so that they will likely be impacted more. Also, as well, smaller firms which can't pay the same salaries as larger firms as well. So there are going to be uneven impacts, but it's not all just to do with the general salary threshold being raised. When it comes to care workers, visa data up to the year ending March 2024, in fact, the year ending, April, in terms of what we got a couple of days ago, have shown a decline in applications. But much of this happens before the ban on dependence was introduced. And what that suggests is it might actually not be to do with that, and could instead be due to additional Home Office scrutiny of applications. There's quite widespread exploitation in the care sector. And so it's not quite clear how much of an impact the ban on care workers' dependence is going to have. And it's possible that it won't have too much of an impact. You know, some people with families may be deterred from coming to the UK, albeit they could also just leave their families behind, and we have an increase in family separation. But even if these people do decide they don't want to come to the UK, there are lots of people who are single and don't have families who are both willing and able to come to the UK to work in the care sector. And so time will tell basically as to whether that ban on dependence is going to impact the care provider's ability to recruit. We could also, as I sort of hinted on there, have a change in the profile of new care workers. Maybe it's people without families. Maybe, as I say, there could just be family separation instead. There's also anecdotal evidence that sometimes a couple will come to the UK, one as on a care worker visa, another on a dependent visa, but they'll both still work in the care sector, and sometimes for the same employer. So maybe just that the couple, rather than being a main applicant and a dependent, will both come as main applicants and work in the care sector. There's a lot to sort of see in the data going forward to try and interpret what this change means. Then I'll perhaps touch on the graduate visa in a moment, but just sort of lastly, the minimum income threshold, so the minimum salary that British citizens and migrants of permanent residence have to earn to bring their partners and children with them to the UK. We don't expect there to be much of an impact on numbers, because family migration doesn't make up that big of a role in terms of overall net migration. But there is, of course, a big impact personally on the people that it affects. And it could, in theory, affect up to 70% of workers in the UK. That's how high the threshold has been set. And one of the interesting quirks about this is that a British citizen who was working as a nurse and earns below 38,700 from January 2025, or early 2025, I should say, would not be able to bring a partner from overseas to the UK because they earn under the threshold. But a migrant nurse coming to the UK on the skilled worker route would be able to bring their dependents with them. So there's an interesting sort of question there about sort of the unequal treatment there, which I think is quite interesting. So yeah, that's perhaps a quick summary of some of those changes.
Yeah, no, Ben, thank you very much. You give a very interesting overview of the impact of on different areas and on different sectors. So another question we had for you was, I mean, you touched so far, the impact on the labor market. Of course, Federico also covered like the student immigration, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, there's been like a lot of polemics, a lot of debate in the last period about the crumbling finances of higher education institutions. So as a higher education institution, of course, we are interested in this. How do you think these policy changes or the uncertainty related to these policy changes, for example, graduate visa, we still don't know whether it will be implemented or not, it will be kept or not, affects, you think, like the university or higher education institution finances? So can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, again, as Federico mentioned, that the graduate route has played a part in making UK universities more attractive to international students. I don't think it's the whole story. There is a government target to increase the numbers and the range of students recruited into UK universities, but it most certainly has played some role there. And again, as summarised, the Migration Advisory Committee advised against closing the route on the basis that it could put UK universities at financial risk because of the fact that the real value of domestic students' fees has fallen. I didn't necessarily say it shouldn't be scrapped at all, but advised against making any decision at least until after the impact of the ban on students' dependents is known. So we'll have to wait until the next academic year to find out how that ban has impacted student recruitment. But some of the data we see at the moment is that student deposits have fallen. Now, maybe if the graduate route isn't scrapped, potential students who have not paid their deposits, maybe then will pay their deposits, but it's all very up in the air. And so that's why the MAC has recommended keeping the route, certainly at the very least, until we get a bit more clarity about how the sector's been affected by the ban on students' dependents. And I think this all really sort of highlights a broader question about trade-offs when making immigration policy. So you can cut international student migration. Sure, that's a perfectly viable thing to do. But then you have to answer the question about where does the funding come from instead for UK universities. It's a similar thing with the care sector. You can cut international migration into the care sector, but then there's a question about how vacancies are filled. As I say, migration isn't the only answer to these questions. There are alternatives, but these can take time and they often come at a cost, including a financial cost. And so, yeah, it's a world of trade-offs, immigration policy. And I think the question around student visas and the graduate route really highlights that.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben, for your answers. So now I give the floor to Matilde. Matilde, Rosina, and
thank you, Matteo. Thanks a lot. So I will be focusing on irregular migration and asylum. And sorry, I will first focus on some of the main policy changes that we've seen over the past couple of years, and then some of the main trends in irregular migration and asylum figures. And of course, we in the last couple of years, addressing and decreasing irregular migration has been a key priority for the government. So we've seen a number of policies and laws being adopted in order to deter unauthorized migration and to enhance cooperation with third countries. Now, three of the main policy changes have been the adoption of the Illegal Migration Act and of the UK-Rwanda Treaty and the following Safety of Rwanda Bill. So just to go a bit more in detail into this, the Illegal Migration Act was adopted in July 2023, and the goal here was explicitly to prevent and to deter irregular migration. Basically, what the Act does is it created a legal duty to remove all migrants arriving irregularly in the UK. So how this is done is basically by, in theory at least, returning them either to their home countries, so to their countries of origin, or to another safe country. And the Act actually identifies 57 such potentially safe third countries. But it is important to know that actually the UK has an agreement with only one of these countries, being, of course, Rwanda at the moment. Now, in this context, this leads to the UK-Rwanda treaty that was actually launched, let's say, in started the policy by the Johnson cabinet, and the treaty was eventually signed in April 2023. And at its core, really, it foresees the transfer of asylum seekers to Rwanda in order to have their asylum claims being processed there. So the idea really is that someone arriving irregularly in the UK would be sent to Rwanda, but the key point is also that if their claims for asylum are accepted, they will not be able to come back to the UK, but they will remain in Rwanda. Now, the UK-Rwanda Treaty was deemed unlawful by the UK Supreme Court in November 2023 because of risks of asylum seekers' mistreatment in Rwanda, as the Rwandan judicial system was found not to be independent, and there was a risk that asylum seekers might be sent to countries where their life might be at risk. So in response to this, the government announced and eventually passed the Safety of Rwanda Bill Act now, which basically designated Rwanda as a safe country and compelled policymakers and courts to recognize it as such. So what this means is that basically it's much harder to raise legal challenges against the UK-Rwanda Treaty. And of course, the bill has become law in April 2024, with the government planning to have the first flights starting off in the upcoming weeks and potentially just after the general elections in July. Now, all of these policy changes, so the Illegal Migration Act and the UK-Rwanda Treaty and the Safety of Rwanda Act, have been the object of extensive criticism by international organizations as well as civil society. And this has been on a number of grounds, including human rights, legality, and effectiveness grounds. Now, I think I will leave the more legal aspects to Hermione, given she's an expert on this. But just to mention that the UNHCR, which is the UN agency dealing with refugees, has explicitly stated that the Rwanda deal, and I quote here, runs counter to the fundamental principles of global solidarity and responsibility sharing. And the reason here is that really there is this outsourcing of the asylum process rather than the sharing of responsibility for refugees at the global level. And on a pragmatic level, I would argue that the whole goal of the Rwanda plan, that is to deter migrants, there is reason to suspect that it will not work. And this is because evidence suggests that deterrence is a weak strategy to address irregular migration. Because at its core, it fails to address the root causes of migration, really. So economic conflicts, corruption very often. And as a consequence, as a consequence of deterrence policies, migration often shifts to other entry points, but is not really stopped. And what is interesting is that the Home Office itself actually recognized that that many studies actually have found that deterrence doesn't work. Now, on top of these main policy changes that have been kind of the major changes, what I think is important to highlight is that in parallel, the UK has also increased cooperation with several European and international partners. This is what the literature calls the externalisation of migration, so increasing the involvement of third countries through the Rwanda deal, but not only. To give you some examples, between 2022 and 23, the UK signed a deal with Albania to return migrants with an irregular status there, Albanian migrants with an irregular status there. It also secured a deal with France to sponsor a detention center and border patrols along French coasts. It signed a deal with Turkey to strengthen cooperation on smuggling, and more recently, in 2024, it signed an agreement with Frontex to increase information sharing and operational collaboration and training. Now, these are the main changes that I think are important to highlight, but let's move now to the trends in irregular migration, really. And what you see here on the slide is the number of small boat arrivals to the UK over the last couple of years. And we see, first of all, that these have increased substantially between 2018 and 2022. They have peaked in 2022 at 45,774. To then slightly decline in 2023 to 29,000. So this is a 36% decrease compared to 2022. But what is interesting to note is that this figure for 2023 is roughly in line with the figure that we had for 2021, which was about 28,000. And indeed, what we see is that the decrease from 2022 to 23 is mainly driven, predominantly driven really, by the drop in the number of Albanian migrants. So Albanian migrants peaked at over 12,000 in 2022. So it was a significant increase, but then they dropped back. And last year, they were less than 1,000 actually in 2023. So we really see the change between 22 and 23 really been driven by this drop in Albanian migrants more than anything else. And when it comes to the main nationalities, they are highlighted here in the graphs of the arrivals. So we see main nationalities are people from Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and interestingly for 2023, Turkey as well. So this has become one of the top 3 countries of origin for arrivals. Data for 2024 is still provisional, but it was released just 2 days ago. And what it shows is that in the first 3 months of the year, actually migration or small boat arrivals were 43% higher than in the same period in 2023. So we see a slight increase. It's still early to see what will happen, but that's kind of what we see for the first 3 months. What I think is interesting to highlight in this context is that a lot of attention is placed on small boat arrivals, on crossing via the channel. However, we need to contextualize this because actually the literature has often highlighted that very often crossing irregularly by small boats is not the most common way of being irregular in a country. And so what I think is important to look at is also the number of visa overstayers, which is basically those people who come on a tourist or a student visa, for instance, and then they stay after the visa expire, so they don't go back. Now, the numbers of this are not very straightforward, I must say, and we don't have any recent figures, but the latest figure we have are those for the year ending in March 2020. And basically, the number of people who either departed after their visa expired or for whom there was no evidence of departure, so the people who we could consider as being visa overstayer for some time, at least, it stood at over 90,000 for the year ending in March 2020, over 90,000. And this compared to 2,000 landings via small boats in the same period. So we see already a significant difference in the trends between small boat arrivals and visa overstayers. As I said, no more recent data, unfortunately, but that's, I think, an interesting trend to keep in mind. And we will, I think the second point, if we can, yeah, that's fine. We can see on this slide, but it's still a second point that I think is important to highlight is also the mixed nature of the flows, as indeed, as you see here from the nationality, top nationalities of arrivals, we have countries like Afghanistan, Syria, and Iran, and people from these countries have extremely high rates of success in their asylum asylum applications. To give you a sense, Afghans and Syrians have about 99–98% success rate in asylum applications. Iranians have 78%. So basically, it's very, very high, the number of people who get asylum out of these nationalities. And more broadly, even beyond these nationalities, in 2022, 90% of all the people who arrived by small boats applied for asylum. So this was 41,000 out of 45,000. So the vast majority. And really, this points to the fact that most of these flows really include people seeking asylum. So I will just conclude with a brief point, leaving behind irregular migration. Now I will focus more on resettlement and humanitarian visa. And indeed, the UK, to give you some context, has a number of visa schemes, humanitarian visa schemes, targeted primarily at people from Ukraine, Hong Kong, and Afghanistan, as Federico was mentioning. It also has some resettlement initiatives that are not tied to specific nationalities. In 2023, the number of resettlement humanitarian visas stood at about 100,000. And this was a significant drop compared to 2022. It was actually about a third of the 22 figure, which stood at almost 300,000. And the decrease really is mainly driven by the contraction in the number of visa granted to Ukrainians, as actually, and that's the Ukrainians is the big kind of pink part of the column in 2022, as most applications from Ukrainian nationals took place in the spring and summer of 2022, so just after the start of the war and after the UK opened the scheme, but then dropped since then. So to conclude, really, I've highlighted some main policy changes, including the Legal Migration Act and the Rwanda Treaty, but also increasing cooperation between the UK and third countries on smuggling, intelligence, coastal patrol, border patrols. And also we see that the number of small boat arrivals has decreased in the last year, in 2023, but mainly driven by a drop in the number of Albanians. And that really, it's mainly made up of people who do apply for asylum, pointing to the mixed nature of the flows. Thanks a lot. So I will stop here.
Thanks, Matilde. It was very clear, and it's staggering to see like the decrease in number of Ukrainian visa 2023 versus 2022. Okay, so it's time for Hermione, our colleague at the School of Law, and as Matilde already anticipated, it would be very interesting to know from you, Hermione, if you could give us some legal background around this treatise and bill. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matteo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this timely and important discussion on post-Brexit UK migration trends. It is really an honor and delight to be here witnessing the great research done by you, the Brunel researchers working on this report, as well as affiliates to the Law Economics and Finance Research Center. So congratulations to you all for authoring this report. I read it with great pleasure, and it really shed light on questions I had in mind when considering the legal framework and the legal changes and policy changes that we witnessed over the past years that Matilde has touched upon. What I will be doing in my short intervention is offering some comments on your reports from my point of view, and will suggest some ideas for revision, because to my understanding, this is your preliminary report, and you are also inviting ideas for feedback in order to revise to a finalized report. More particularly, I will be focusing on the section on legal measures as regards the irregular migration parts that Matilde has focused on. So first of all, my first and broader comment regards to legal developments connecting to trends. So I would like to see a little bit more connecting of the dots, if possible, and depending on the audience and means of dissemination of this report. I just found that from my point of view, I would like to see a little bit more discussion of legal measures recently adopted and how do they connect to the trends. You do offer this overview of changes in UK asylum law that have been implemented post-Brexit and within this recent years in 2023. You do mention the 2023 Legal Migration Act, the UK-Rwanda Treaty originating from the Memorandum of Understanding, the subsequent safety of Rwanda bill that was just adopted in last month, really, in response to the ruling of the Supreme Court finding the Memorandum of Understanding unlawful, mainly for the reason that Rwanda was not found to be a sufficiently safe third country in light of reports of human rights organizations, updated reports of the human rights organizations. So you do refer to this revised, reformed legal framework, and you also offer a comment on how these new measures rely on a strong element of deterrence as well as an element of externalization that go hand in hand, and this is all great. What I would say is that the section on legal developments perhaps reads somewhat disjointed from the rest of the report on trends and developments. And considering this is a preliminary report, I'm just offering this as feedback, but it's up to you on whether you wish to act upon this or not. And I'm not sure if it makes sense if you do not, if you intend to present this report only at this level of this is what's happening. So you can think about it depending on what your audience is, and particularly if you're thinking about presenting this report as a policy paper or as an academic journal later on, you could build on this discussion. Yes, so what I think you could do is work a little bit more on connecting these dots or reflecting on how they might be connected. So I will offer some thoughts on what you could do to achieve this if you wish to do so. First, and before I make any assumptions, you could ask questions such as what is it you're trying to achieve through the section on legal measures, on irregular migrations, regulating irregular migration and asylum law, by reference to the overarching purpose of your report, your article, perhaps in the future. So what does it add to the narrative of your report? From a legal point of view, it might be the law as such that might have contributed to such reported migration trends. So that is something that could be highlighted, posed as a question. The first thing you could add is that these new legal developments that you mentioned, as well as the Nationality and Borders Act of 2022, are directly linked to the legal gap created by Brexit. So the new immigration policy was a necessity, in a way, was a legal necessity. Brexit meant that the common European asylum system ceased to apply to the UK, to the extent that the UK was part of it. So new law would anyway be needed to replace what was in place. And in the absence of an agreement with our European partners, including in the trade and cooperation agreement, as we had with for other policy areas such as trade or even extradition. So this is one suggestion to acknowledge the legal necessity for this new immigration policy, for revising the law, for reforming the law. We had to do this, but also that came with a great opportunity for the government to introduce this new immigration policy with coupled with anti-migration agenda of deterrence, migration prevention, resulting also to refugee deterrence. So this is one suggestion, explaining how legal changes are there to fill in a gap created by Brexit. Perhaps I should mute my chat. Yeah, this is the first idea on how you could add to the narrative and connect the section on legal developments with migration trends so that there is more of, you can build on the coherence. My next suggestion would be more particularly to consider, ask, reflect on how migration trends might also be correlated to the UK's exit from the Common European Asylum System that followed the UK's departure from the EU at a more specific legal level. And why is this? The end of the Common European Asylum System not only created a legal gap, it created a gap of externalisation. And that will help us to appreciate why so much externalisation. It meant the end of the Dublin system, the former, yet still applicable with some changes, mechanism of allocating responsibility among member states, a responsibility that is shared among member states of the European Union. Now, whether responsibility has been shared among European states in an equal way, in solidarity, that is the subject matter of a whole other debate. But responsibility was shared, has been shared among EU member states. The UK, on the other hand, post-Brexit, can no longer share such responsibility with any other state and is now responsible on its own without any partners to lean on for support, which might explain why so many externalization initiatives, discussions, Rwanda, Turkey, Albania, France. There have been discussions with Armenia. So it is quite interesting also to consider this correlation. The former Dublin system, as well as the current mechanism for allocating responsibility, relied, as a lot of people here will know, but some might not because they have not worked on EU asylum law, relied on this rule of the country of first entrance. In the event of an irregular entry, the country of first entrance would be the responsible one, so periphery countries of the EU's external border, mainly Spain, Italy, Greece, Hungary, and other member states where the asylum seeker would try to lodge an application subsequently could transfer the asylum seeker back to the country of first entrance in principle and subject to exceptions, but that was in principle the rule. Post-Brexit, the UK has now become the first and only responsible state and can no longer transfer applicants to frontline states that were usually the states of first entrance. The change has potentially been a pull factor for asylum seekers, as the UK is bound by international refugee law and not only by the European Convention of Human Rights, and need to process every application on an individual basis. So it becomes clear why the UK immigration policy relies even more on externalization, on deterrence, to address this shift in responsibility. What the UK-Rwanda treaty does, therefore, as well as other agreements with Albania, Turkey, France, is in a way mimicking the Dublin externalization effect. And I refer to externalization here. I take the broad approach, viewing Dublin as an internal externalization tool that would externalize or outsource responsibility to the periphery of the European Union, rather than outside the borders of the European Union, beyond the borders to a third country. So that's the Dublin externalization effect at the periphery was in a way acting as a deterrent effect so far, and its absence might have been a pull factor. As we saw from the increase of small boat arrivals post-Brexit. So I would suggest perhaps posing some questions on this, on potential links between trends, the end of the common European asylum system, and it could perhaps increase the coherence of the narrative in the report, if you need to do so. One last comment on the broader context. These days is very interesting, it's fascinating, but also quite difficult to follow on developments on asylum law on both sides of the channel. We've had quite a few changes in EU asylum law as well, which in a way feed the discussion in the UK. So you could also add some discussion by referring to these broader European trends. Perhaps as a broader European trend affecting UK policy. Perhaps you could say a few words about global context, the global trends of externalization. This is not simply a UK phenomenon or a European phenomenon. We have seen externalization initiatives taking place elsewhere. Well, Israel had a treaty with Rwanda that fell through. Denmark was also discussing the possibility of having one. So you could situate these legal changes and policy shift as well as the trends within the broader context of increasing deterrence. We saw how the new Pact on Migration and Asylum that was very recently adopted and is still really at the center of the academic debate. It builds on these trends by creating a pre-screening procedure at grey legal areas. So it builds on externalization at the borders, at grey legal areas at the borders, reminding us of techniques and schemes that the UK policy is relying on, such as the barges used to detain asylum seekers out of sight. So externalization could be perhaps approached or seen in a broader sense to compare and reflect on such trends. And similar to the UK-Rwanda Treaty, the EU and EU member states have also embarked upon partnership agreements with external partnerships, with external partners whose safety is dubious, as well as their compliance with the principle of responsibility sharing, as you have very nicely pointed out already. A few other legal principles of international refugee law might be discussed, might be mentioned in your report, such as non-penalization, non-refoulement, and principle of non-discrimination, prohibition of discrimination of refugees that might be impacted of a potential penalization of asylum seekers who enter the UK in an irregular fashion, which is contrary to the principle of non-penalization that requires states not to penalize refugees by reference to their mode of entering the state, recognizing that refugees very often might not have documentation to use in these journeys. So in brief, if you plan to revise your report, what I would keep in mind is to make it slightly more connected, coherent with a narrative that connects the different sections. And I would be very happy to review a new draft if this helps you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hermione, for the very interesting overview of the legal developments. So let's open the floor to Q&A. I mean, formally we have 7 minutes because we started 35, but if people are happy to stay and the speaker are happy to stay, we can stay a bit longer, right? Okay, I've seen that there are some people that commented on the chat. There is Justin. Justin, are you still there? Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, I'm Justin in East Sussex. I've never heard a convincing explanation as to why people leave France, which is a safe country, to get to Britain by crossing the channel, which is highly dangerous. Do you have an explanation?
Can you specify? Yeah, are you asking? Can you also specify who would like who are you directing the question to?
Who would be best placed to answer that question? Whoever feels most confident.
I can take this. Thanks, Justin. So actually, what we know from the literature is that a lot of the migration flows are driven by factors such as, well, first of all, work opportunities that they might have more in the UK, but also very often networks. So migrant networks are a key aspect. So, you know, whether you already have some family or friends who are in the UK can act as a strong pull factor in a way. So, for instance, we've seen in recent years the number of Syrians in Sweden, for instance, growing, also as a result of this network effect, right? So as you have a community, in a way, it's much easier to go to move to a country or to a city, to a place where you already know someone, because they will be able to help you find a job, navigate the bureaucracy, maybe give you a place to stay in the very initial days or weeks, and so on. And so the networks, the work opportunities, but also language factors could be a key aspect for people who, you know, might already know English, for instance, and be willing to travel there. I don't know if Hermione, I saw you had your hand up, if you wanted to add something.
Yeah, thank you, Matilde, for the answer, and thank you, Justin, for the excellent question. There is also a legal reason to answer your question. Post-Brexit, as I mentioned, the UK is no longer a member of the common European asylum system. France can transfer the asylum seeker back to the country of first entrance, let's say Italy. The UK could do this before Brexit, could transfer an asylum seeker back to Italy if Italy was the country of first entrance. Post-Brexit, it can no longer do this. And this is what we refer to as the paradox of Brexit for asylum law. Brexit discourse was pretty much revolving around taking back control of the borders. In terms of asylum law, this translates to more asylum seekers that cannot be transferred back to a first country of entrance, because the UK is the first and only country of entrance post-Brexit.
Got it. Thank you.
If I can just add to this point, to Hermione, what Hermione has just said, I don't think that's true. To be very honest with you, before Brexit, all right, the illegal people used to come through on lorries and trucks, right? But the UK, there were very few, if any, people who were returned to France. So that's a big exaggeration. I don't really believe. You can go back and look at the numbers, and the actual people who were returned to France were very, very few. The people came on lorries at the time, not on boats. So boats is a more recent phenomenon, but hardly anybody was returned to France. You can go and look up the numbers. So I don't really believe that it's because of Brexit that essentially this happened. I've got a few other points to make. One is I'd like to know, I don't know if anybody's got these numbers on the boat, the people who come on boats. I'd like to know how many people actually have their papers when they enter the UK. All right, because I've heard that a lot of people are throwing away their papers even into the English Channel, and essentially you can come and claim. So you can claim that. How do you prove where the person is from? And if, as it was mentioned earlier, if people from Iraq and Syria, there's a 99% chance that you're going to get asylum. I'd say I'm from Syria or Iraq just to get entry. So I'd like to know how many people. I don't know if these numbers are available. I've not seen. I watch GB News, and GB News is really big on the migrant issue, and they cover it a lot. But I've not even heard them mention as to how many people. I don't know if the Home Office can release these numbers, but how many people actually have when they arrive on the shore? How many people have got their, or what percentage of people have got their papers with them? um, when they actually arrive. Uh, I, I mean, so that's one thing. The other issue I have with, and this might explain. So this might explain why the salary threshold has increased to 38,000 or whatever it is from before. The UK GDP per capita in recent years has drastically reduced. All right, so you can look up the GDP per capita, and that's essentially probably because very low skilled people are being accepted into the country, and care workers, etc. As far as I'm concerned, there are a lot of people sitting on benefits here who are receiving benefits who should get off their backsides and work. All right. So the more people you get from other countries, remember it's like a Ponzi scheme. It's a Ponzi scheme. So these people are there to help the social care sector, but they are also going to get old at some point, and then you've got to get a new load of people to help these people who are going to get old. So it's like a Ponzi scheme. And so it's I think the UK government needs to be really, really tough on this issue, um, and uh, and and discourage people coming from to help out in the social care sector. And if you think about it, it could just be one way to get into the country. So somebody could come and claim that they've got experience in the social care sector, but they may actually not have any intention of remaining in the social care sector. So once they enter in the UK, maybe they work for a month or 2 or 6 months or whatever it is, and then they quit the job. All right. So that means the social care sector um, remains. So those requirements remain unfulfilled, because then essentially once you're in the country, you can do whatever you want. Okay, you can say I don't like the conditions or whatever it is, and do something else. And the final point I'd like to make is one of the slides you had citizenship. I think the people who applied for citizenship last year. So I'd be very, very careful. Um, the citizenship, yeah. So citizenship is, that's right. So citizenship is very, very different from immigration, because if you're, for example, from the non-EU, all right, I don't know about the EU. I myself, I'm from India. I'm of Indian origin, and I left India in 1996. All right, I went to the US for studies, and I worked, and I moved to the UK in 2011 on a work student visa, etc. So, and in 2017, so in the US, I was in the US between 1996 and 2011, and I was either on a student visa or on a work visa. All right, 15 years in the US, either on a student visa and on a work visa, and I accepted. Okay, this is the way the world works, and that was fine. I'd applied for a green card, and probably it would have been granted at some point, but I decided to move to the UK in 2011. And when I moved to the UK in 2011, I was on a work visa, all right? I didn't complain. And in 2017, I believe, 2016 or 2017, I think it was, when I applied for indefinite leave to remain in the UK, and I was granted, because you've got to be in the UK for 5 years in order to be granted indefinite leave to remain. And then 1 year after that, you can apply for citizenship. And eventually I applied for citizenship and I got UK citizenship in 2021. So essentially what I'm trying to say is, if you're non-EU, there's a 6-year gap. All right. So the 5 years you're going to be on, 5 years, it's going to take you 5 years before you get indefinite leave to remain. And then at least 1 more year to get citizenship. So looking at these citizenship grants in last year, 2023, essentially you've got to go back to 2017. All right. So that would be, and still that would not be, that's
Yeah,
not
but
necessarily, that's not
you
necessarily
can,
everything. Yeah. So
yeah,
there could be people who have been indefinite leave to remain a long time ago in 2010 or 2000 even, and who decided to apply for citizenship
that's exactly what
last year.
happened. That's
So
exactly what happened with the European here. So they were not
right,
trusting like the system a lot.
right,
They've been in
right.
the country enough, at least 6 years, and they decided to make themselves regular, right? I know many people, Italians, for example, that said, okay, I don't trust too much like the settlement status system. So it's
That's right.
better if I protect myself by applying for citizenship. You're right. These people that are applying are those that got the right to apply. You can't apply if you've been in the country less than 6 years. So, but
So I
that
think,
the result of Brexit.
yeah, well, I think just the immigration thing is a major issue, and it's going to become a political issue. We've got the elections now on July the 4th, and it's going to become a really, it's just getting different people, and essentially there are issues with assimilation, how many people assimilate into British culture, and that's a major issue. Um, as I said, I'm of Indian origin, and last year or 2 years ago, there was in Leicester. In Leicester, there were riots after a cricket match, all right, between India and Pakistan. There were Hindu-Muslim riots in Leicester. So essentially, you bring people from other countries and other cultures, etc., and they come. Obviously, there are positives and negatives, so they come with their own issues and their own problems, and so it's just and the scale that's happening, it's happening on such a large scale that I don't think it's very difficult in such a short time to get people and have them assimilate, etc. And it's I think it's going to I just fear for this country in about 30 years. So I'm in 2054. I'm just looking at what I've got ideas on what's going to happen to this country, to the UK in 2054, and essentially, I don't have a very positive view. So that's all I have to say. Sorry for going on, but
no, thanks for your question and comments. So I think Matilde's got a question, and then I would like to ask a question as well.
No, sorry. I just wanted to come back to Hugh's point. So thanks, Hugh, for your comments. Just very briefly, because I'm conscious of time, to answer to your questions. You were asking how many people have documents. Well, there's no data about that, but I would actually, what we know is that many people don't have documents. Sometimes, if they leave from a situation of conflict in a hurry, they actually don't have them. Other times, they don't, they don't have those documents. But that is an issue for the identification of these people, and it has implications for the asylum process because it's harder, but also for the return of the migrants. And indeed, the number of returns of migrants to their countries of origin has constantly decreased substantially by about 80% over the last 10 years. And part of that is also because it's very hard to know exactly where these people come from, but also then, of course, you need agreements with the countries of origin, and you need to make sure they are safe. And very briefly on your other point about migrants and taking more from the, for instance, the welfare state, actually there is a very interesting research done by Dassman and Frattini from 2014, where it shows that migrants from the EU and outside the EU rely much less on the welfare state and contribute more fiscally in the UK compared to natives. And particularly they rely much less on housing, for example. And the reason for this is that very often they would leave, so come here, work here, but then leave once they're older. So of course there is not the cost to support them in the later stages. But I will stop here because I'm conscious of time, and I saw Hermione also muted herself, so I'm not sure if she wanted to add something.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's already 11:12. Again, we can close the session formally, but if people are happy to stay, I mean, it would be really nice.
Maybe I could just say a couple of words on the fiscal impact of migration. Useful.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about the question of fiscal impact and about the impact of migration. Of course, the big numbers are on work and workers and immigrants on public services, right? So one of the reasons that of wanting to reduce net migration is that you put less pressure on NHS, on police, and all these public services. So what can you say about that? Because I mean, maybe immigrants do not use the NHS more than the natives that are. So what are your comments about that?
Yeah, so studies, including the Duisman study just mentioned there, generally what they found is that the impact of immigration on the public finances is small. It can go a bit sort of plus or minus, but generally migrants pay in about as much as they take out through use of public services and things like that. There is a breakdown in many of these studies which show that EU migrants had a positive impact and non-EU migrants a negative one. But how relevant this is going to be going forward, I'm not really sure. I think with the new migration system, maybe it's a less useful way of thinking about it. But I think a lot of this does come down to sort of who the people are specifically. So people that have children, they tend to have a more negative impact on public finances because children don't tend to work, but they do go to school. The same point, migrants generally, at least a lot of the migrants arriving now, can't claim benefits under something called no recourse to public funds. So that restricts a lot in terms of the extent to which benefits are paid to migrants. Public finances as well, it depends on the service, but generally the impacts are small. But this may be sort of to tie the two together. Part of the impact on public services is also a policy choice. So in the Office for Budget Responsibility's latest report, they looked at migration and they found, as he noted to you, that migration in recent years has increased GDP, but not GDP per person. And how the government has responded to the additional money that's been generated by increased migration is not to direct that towards public services, but instead to use essentially to lower borrowing costs. And so what that means is that there are more people, but then there's less money per person being spent on public services. But through a conscious decision by policymakers to prioritise reducing borrowing rather than funneling that money towards public services. So just to sort of summarize that, I think the impacts are small here, but there are decisions which affect the specifics.
Yeah, Ben, thank you very much. I understand you have to leave, so thanks again for your presentation. And I understand you are very busy, like commenting also the new net migration figure. So thanks again for your participation.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Fede?
Yes, thanks, Ben. No, very briefly, because I think you raised a point on citizenship grants that we see here and in the graph. And yeah, I do totally agree with you about the fact that these trends reflect some changes or some choices or some migration trends that happened 6 or 10 years earlier. So that was it was not the point. The point of showing this graph was not that of providing updated data on the latest movement. But what is interesting, I think, is that after the new migration system was implemented, there was an unusual rise, and so I think that it is interesting to see that that this does not reflect a policy of 10 years or 6 years or 7 years earlier, but actually it happened just after the new immigration system was implemented, and there is research suggesting that this could have been spurred by the uncertainty that the new immigration system has created and the willingness to secure their place within the United Kingdom by those who already have leave to remain, but not citizenship yet. And so those who were able to apply for, they did in this period. So it is a way of navigating uncertainty. At least this is what studies from Springford suggests. I hope this helps understanding the full picture.
Yeah, thanks, Federico. That's fine.
I've seen Egol. Is there anyone from the public that would like to ask a question? Or
sorry, Matteo, I really need to go to another meeting,
Okay.
so I really need to go.
Okay.
But it was really a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so why don't
and
we do?
good luck
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the report.
Thank you very much. Why don't we do this? Why don't we close it now? And if you got any question, just send us an email. And I would like to thank again Hermione for your very interesting insights, Matilde and Federico. And yeah, let's close it here, and then hopefully send us your feedback, and you can get like the new version of the reports with the new comments implemented. Thanks again to everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.